Let's talk about selection tools. This is traditional versus the new way. If we wanted to, say, draw on this apple, I'm just going to pick it up and draw. Now, it is drawn over everything in this layer. If you look in my layers menu, it is smashed right on there. I'm going to go ahead and Control Z to undo that. If I want to just draw on one part of this layer, I can make a selection. The most traditional ways would be the rectangle and elliptical marquee. So if I draw a box, you can see we get what is called the marching ants, and that is a selection. If I now paint, it's only going to paint inside the selection, even though you see I'm bringing the paintbrush down much lower. That is the idea of a selection. To get rid of a selection, Control or Command D will get rid of a selection. Now I still have where I drew, so I'm actually going to back up a couple steps here, get rid of all of that. Once again, Control D to get rid of your marching ants. That is the idea behind a selection. Now, in the old days, we only had these three basic ones. Your lasso tool can just basically lasso around something. So we get a basic selection. If I were to just hit the delete key, you can see it is only going to delete what's inside that selection. Let's undo that and get rid of those marching ants. The next one down is the Polygon Lasso tool. It's going to draw by click, 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 more straight lines. So this is kind of a trendy look. We might want to have a jagged looking outline background behind this. So when you get to the end, it's going to join them and you have your marching ants. So let's say we wanted to get rid of the white on the outside of that selection. If I hit the delete key, that's not what we want. Control Z. I can right click and select the inverse and now hit delete. That's kind of a look that some people would like that. In fact, I kind of like it. And in fact, now that it's cut out, we could make as many copies of that as we want. We could have a whole bunch on the screen. I'm going to undo that, though. That's not what we're doing right now. So there's one more traditional tool, which is the magnetic lasso tool. If we zoom way in, alternate scroll your mouse, you can see that if you just click and start moving your mouse, it is magnetizing. It kind of sees where there's a difference and it's making those points. I've only clicked my mouse once at this point. I'm just literally scrolling down and it's choosing where my selection is for me. So that is the magnetic lasso tool. In fact, here we'll just, once again, not the greatest because I was moving my mouse, but that's those are the old school. All right, let me get rid of those marching ants, Control D. The easiest way to select this would have been to get the magic wand tool. What the magic wand tool is going to do is choose everything. You're going to click on a pixel and it's going to say, give me everything that is similar to that pixel that I just gave you. Now, because this is over white, it is chosen all of the white. Now, the most important thing to know about this is tolerance. Some days we're more tolerant than other days. If I bring this tolerance way down to 1, let me undo that selection, Control D. And let's try this again with the tolerance of 1. If I were to add a quick mask right now, you would see, and let's invert that quick mask. Just go to your properties, invert. That is not a very good selection. You can zoom in and see that it is not a good selection. So the tolerance was too low. So let's undo that. And let's do it again with a basic tolerance is about 33. And that's going to be perfect for this one. If I up the tolerance to say 200, it's going to start accepting things that it really shouldn't. You see, it's just letting too much in. If we're too tolerant, we're going to allow too much silliness. So I would say to keep your tolerance at about 33. So let's choose it one more time. That looks pretty good. I'm now going to add a layer mask. And because we chose the background, this is actually opposite of what we want. You can go right here to Properties, which will pop out automatically and say Invert. Now let's say the same thing on the lime. Now you could try to actually choose the lime. You can see it's kind of not liking that. And even if you were to up the tolerance, it's still not really going to do the greatest job. The one that I would choose with this one is the next tool down, which is the Quick Selection tool. So the Quick Selection tool, you just click and drag. Can you see that little plus sign? That's saying this is what I'm going to add. So if you wanted to add more, you could just click and drag and it adds. If you decide you want to take away the Alt key, do you see that we now have a minus? We can minus away what we don't want. And of course, you can make your mouse bigger and smaller using the bracket keys. So if you have something very detailed, you can go down to a very small brush with the brackets, or you can go up. You can also change it right here, because remember, whenever you click anything, any tool, it's going to give you all the choices for it up here. So now that we've got a decent selection, I'm going to add a layer mask. Perfect. So let's back up and talk about the new ways to do this. So I'm just going to right click and delete that layer mask. And let's go back to Apple. I'm going to delete that layer mask. And let me show you some of the new tools. So a little trick to be able to use the new tools that Adobe has. One, make sure that you can see your properties panel. And if you can't find it, you can always go to Window, Properties. I, of course, am in the Photography workspace, so I have my properties right here. This is only going to work if you do not have a background layer. Notice if you only have one layer in your Layers panel, it will automatically be a background layer. If you just click right there, all of a sudden it has converted it to a new layer. And you will notice that two new things have appeared here in the quick actions. First off is Select Subject. Now this works on most things, but not everything. It does not work well on logos. It works well on people. It has chosen that perfectly for us. So we can now add a layer mask and we are ready to go. Let's back up, Control Z, and choose the other one, which is just Remove Background. And it's going to say, this is going to discard that selection we already made. Sure. So it did it for us. Perfect. Let's try this on Lime. So once again, this is a background layer. If we unlock it, we now have these two choices. Select Subject. Looks like it did a pretty good job. Or Control D, I'm just going to say Remove Background, and it did it for us. So let's go on to my next example. So let's look at what would happen with this. I'm going to go ahead and turn it off background layer, and let's see what it does when it says Remove Background. Okay, it doesn't understand what's going on here. Do you see that it actually took away some of my mask? I'm sorry, it took away some of my blocks. It left a weird thing here. This is not what we wanted. So I'm going to undo that. Let's see if it does a better job on Select Subject. No, it doesn't. Look what's happening. Now, we could use some of the tools we've learned, like, say, the Quick Selection tool, to fix this. I can just add plus and add that back in, so that would work. Right here, we've got a problem, so I need to minus Alt. And then we need to add this part. Oops, Alt. So this is great, but you know, the problem is I didn't even want this. What I want to do here is change the color of each individual block. So let me Control D. I want to select just this block or just this block. So let's talk about so we're not going to be able to use these new tools. I can just click with my Quick Selection tool, and that did a pretty good job. I can add an adjustment layer of, say, hue and saturation and change the color of that mask. There we have before and after. All right, let's go back to our original layer and see if I can use one of the other ones. What if we used the Magic Wand tool and chose with I have the tolerance still at 200. Let's change that tolerance to about 33. And let's choose the red. Okay. See now 33. Do you see what's happened? It's a little bit too much. Let me turn this one off. That is red that is touching it. So let's talk about this button right here, contiguous. Contiguous means I want you to get things that are this same color that are touching. So if I turn that off or turn it back on, it's now only got things that are touching. So because this red and this red is not touching this red, it's only gotten this red. Let's add another adjustment layer. Maybe this time let's turn it black and white. Oh, now you can see we didn't have the greatest selection. But you can see that these automatic tools that Adobe had is not going to help us with this. Now there's one more tool that was underneath here that we didn't look at. Once again, make sure you're back on the original layer when you do something like this. Let's go back over to these selection tools, and there was one more we didn't look at called the Object Selection tool. So what that does is it will deal with something like this, and instead of just select subject. You can tell it's like select subject, but only this select subject. That did a pretty good job. So select object tool, just within these bounds, it got that object. So that did pretty well, actually, of the new tools. So that's a basic look at the main tools. Let's up the vibrance isn't going to help. Let's put a photo filter. Warming. Oh, yes, I did just warm that up some. Okay, so I'm going to put all of the different masks on. So you can see we have 3 different adjustment layer masks within one photo, and we wouldn't really have been able to do that with any of the new AI tools because they wouldn't understand what we were trying to do. So there you go. Those are the traditional selection tools and some of the new ones. Now there's more, and I'll talk about that later.